Singapore's founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew dies. Life imprisonment for a man convicted of killing his parents. And Yemen on the edge of civil war.
Good evening. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's first prime minister, died early this morning at the age of 91. While residents of the city-state began mourning their beloved founding father, tributes began pouring in from world leaders.
Lee Kuan Yew died at 3:18 this morning in Singapore. His son and current prime minister nearly broke down while informing the nation.
I'm deeply saddened to tell you that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew passed away peacefully this morning at the Singapore General Hospital. The first of our founding fathers is no more.
Lee had been suffering from severe pneumonia since February 5th. Singaporeans began bracing for his eventual passing. Many expressed their sadness among a sea of flowers and messages outside the hospital.
I'm very grateful that he has contributed a lot for Singapore. And without him, I don't think we will be such a developed country.
It's affecting the whole family, and God bless his soul, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Without him, we wouldn't be what we are right now.
If not for him, you never see Singapore on the world map.
Residents lined the streets to say farewell to Lee as a hearse carrying his body arrived at Istana, the official residence of the president. Singapore has declared a period of national mourning until his funeral on Sunday. World leaders began lauding Lee for being a remarkable statesman.
He has been committed to developing mutually beneficial cooperation between China and Singapore, making historical contributions to the bilateral relationship.
He was a giant in the region and an incredible statesman. He'll be sorely missed.
His wisdom, his advice, his insight have always been sought for by leaders of other nations. As a Southeast Asian, I feel a great sense of loss.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called Lee a great leader for building Singapore's foundation for prosperity. Indonesian Vice President Yusuf Kala described Lee as one of the most inspiring leaders of all time. And U.S. President Barack Obama said America was deeply saddened and called Lee a visionary.
Lee Kuan Yew is best remembered as the founding father of modern Singapore. He was credited with the Lion City's economic success, but critics decried his iron-fisted rule. Let's take a look back at his life.
Merger and the unity of these two territories. You know, as a people connected by geography, economics, and ties of kinship. Would you mind if we stop for a while?
An emotional Lee Kuan Yew on August 9, 1965, the historical day when Singapore broke away from Malaysia and became an independent and sovereign republic. Lee, however, was concerned about the new country's future because it was small and lacked natural resources. All the more amazing, then, to witness Singapore's transformation from a sleepy tropical port to a bustling financial hub over the next few decades. Lee received a law degree from Cambridge University in 1950. He then returned to Singapore, still under British rule at the time, and entered politics. The idea of self-governance and an end to British colonial rule was the driving force behind Lee's move to co-found the People's Action Party, or PAP, on November 12, 1954. By 1959, the PAP had won a landslide victory in the elections, and Singapore became self-governed with Lee as its first prime minister. In 1963, Singapore joined the new Federation of Malaysia, but that union only lasted 2 years. By 1965, Lee formally announced the separation and the full independence of Singapore. Lee served as a city-state's first prime minister for more than 30 years. During this period, the Lion City enjoyed strong economic growth. Its pro-business policies help give its people one of the highest per capita incomes in the world. Singapore, along with Hong Kong, Taiwan, and South Korea, are known as the Four Asian Tigers. Critics, however, spoke out against the city-state's strict policies on law and order, as well as freedom of expression and assembly. Among the examples they cited, a ban on chewing gum sales that Singapore once enforced, and its continued use of caning for what's considered minor crimes. Lee stepped down as prime minister in 1990 and went on to serve as senior minister and minister mentor over the next 2 decades before retiring from the cabinet in 2011. His son, Lee Hsien Loong, is the current prime minister. Lee Kuan Yew was also considered a friend of China and a middleman in cross-strait relations. An ice-breaking 1993 meeting between the top envoys from Beijing and Taipei, Wang Dohan and Ku Chen-fu, was held in Singapore.
Mourners poured into the Singapore Consulate General here in Hong Kong this afternoon to pay tribute to the late Lee Kuan Yew. Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying was one of them. Greeted by the Consul General, Jackie Fu, the CE bowed his head in silence in front of a picture of Lee and then signed the Book of Condolence. The tribute area at the Consulate General will be opened until Sunday. Under the leadership of Lee, Singapore forged close ties with Hong Kong. Evelina Leung has more in this report.
This is probably one of the deepest impressions that Hong Kong people have of Lee Kuan Yew.
There is no need to challenge the PRC politically.
This was part of Lee's speech at the University of Hong Kong's 80th anniversary celebrations in 1992. At that time, Beijing was criticizing the political reform proposal put forward by the then Hong Kong Governor Chris Patten.
Hong Kong deserves democracy. What do you think, sir?
Yes, Hong Kong deserves democracy, but alas, in the world as it is, we do not often get what we deserve.
That was not the first time Lee spoke at the University of Hong Kong. In 1970, he received an honorary doctorate degree from the university. In his acceptance speech, Lee said had he been required to write a paper to earn this degree, the title would have been Hong Kong and Singapore, A Tale of Two Cities. He cited the similarities between the two former British colonies, but said that Singapore had a lot to learn from Hong Kong.
Maybe Singaporeans are benighted, not as intelligent as Hong Kong people. Therefore, they vote for Lee Kuan Yew.
However, Lee's influence over matters related to Hong Kong was undeniable. For example, the former prime minister would visit the city almost every year to hold meetings with the governor. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher also sought Lee's advice before meeting with China's elder statesman Deng Xiaoping to talk about the future of Hong Kong. In 1992, in an interview with TVB News, Lee said the mainland worried about the impact of Hong Kong's democratization.
They do not want Hong Kong to be a political model for China. They want Hong Kong to be an economic model for China. So if you roll up the two into one, democracy plus free market produces prosperous Hong Kong, then that is a challenge to their system.
In 2000, protesters greeted Lee when he received an honorary doctorate degree from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. The demonstrators criticized Lee for ruling the Lion City with an iron fist.
I'm not down here to seek the approval of the citizens of Hong Kong.
Lee also said if the protesters are really courageous, they should be protesting at Beijing instead. He also said there is no hope for universal suffrage for Hong Kong if the central government isn't willing to agree to it. In 2000, Lee also said the chief executive elected by the election committee was not fully recognized because only 400 people were allowed to cast their ballots. He said it would have been a different story had the CE been elected by 4 million voters. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
In other news, the man convicted of murdering his parents 2 years ago has been sentenced to life imprisonment. Ronnie Samtani reports.
Henry Chow was escorted to the High Court this morning. Last Friday, a jury found him guilty of 2 counts of murder. In handing down the sentence, Mr. Justice Michael Stuart Moore said Chow has a personality disorder and no compassion for others. The judge called Chow cold-blooded and said he blamed others for his own faults. The judge even described the defendant as dangerous after evidence showed Chow had spent 6 months planning the double murder. Chow was sentenced to life behind bars. He had earlier admitted to preventing the lawful burial of the deceased. For that, he was sentenced to 9 years and 4 months in prison. The judge mentioned that Chow's psychiatric report will be referenced when considering parole, but he believes it will be a long time before that happens. During the trial, the court heard that Chow lured his parents to a flat in Tai Kok Tsui on March 1, 2013, where he killed them and later dismembered their bodies. Chow's alleged accomplice, Tse Chun Kei, was acquitted of murder last week. The judge mentioned that police had detained Tse for more than 40 hours and interrogated him for 9 hours. Noting that Tse had an IQ lower than the average person, the judge criticized the police's brutal and unacceptable practice and said it may cause injustice. He said the Department of Justice and police should reflect on this. Ronnie Samtani, TVB News.
The United Nations Security Council is warning the conflict in Yemen is pushing the Arab country to the edge of civil war. Shiite rebel fighters opposed to Yemen's president have seized the country's third largest city of Taiz in the latest sign Yemen is sliding into irreversible turmoil. James Aiken reports.
The conflict and its political crisis have deepened since the rebel Houthi fighters seized the capital Sana'a in September and effectively dissolved the country's parliament. Yemen's al-Qaeda branch, considered by the United States the terror network's most dangerous offshoot, has stepped up attacks against the Iranian-backed Shiite rebels. And Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the 2 mosque bombings in Sana'a on Friday that left more than 130 people dead. In a fiery televised speech hours after his militia seized Taiz, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, the head of the powerful Shiite Muslim group, vowed to pursue the militants behind the suicide attacks. During an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, the special envoy for Yemen stressed that peaceful dialogue is the only option.
What alternative do we have? Any side that would want to push the country in either direction would be inviting a protracted conflict in the vein of an Iraq, Libya, Syria combined scenario.
Yemen's president, who is trying to mount a comeback from the temporary capital of Aden, has asked the UN Security Council for help. The UN's most powerful body says it will take further measures, which could mean new sanctions or other actions against aggressors. Yemen's UN ambassador urged the council to curb the rebels' drums of war, which he said are incited by Iranian ambitions in Yemen. The takeover of the central city of Taiz risks drawing neighboring oil giant Saudi Arabia and its main regional rival Iran into the conflict. Gulf Arab leaders and security officials support Yemen's president and regard the Shiite rebels as terrorists. And they've already